they used to. And I kind of look around and I think, well, can you blame them? Because every day your audience is enduring failures of leadership. And I think we're surrounded by inconsistent messaging and deceptive practices in the halls of government. And they've lost brands that they thought that they knew, that they thought maybe that they could trust. And even like the public figures that used to offer kind of like the final word on the day's news. When people don't know who to trust and then they decide not to believe anything, when they get into that mindset of like, well, all politicians lie or that's how they get you, what happens is they grow cynical. And that's not really a productive stance for anyone, certainly not for any of our users or for any of us, and definitely not for our society. And I think in this age now of fake news and hidden agendas and whatnot, cynicism can oftentimes feel safe. People turn away from experts; they take refuge in their filter bubbles, and then they eventually turn inward because we saw how filter bubbles aren't always so productive for us. And as people turn inward, that's when they can grow to distrust even their own gut instincts. They lose confidence in their ability to make good decisions. And that's when things get even more kind of mired and stuck. And I think that place of economic depression and indecision, I think that's exactly where we need to meet our users. And I think that's where we can go to regain our audiences, to rebuild their sense of trust, their sense of confidence and empowerment. And in order to do that, we need to meet them where they are, not to stoke their cynicism, but rather to affirm their hope. And I think that that's something that we can tap into through content and design. We can affirm their hope, their interest in learning, and their enthusiasm for feeling knowledgeable. Because that's the thing. Everybody thinks that they want to be smarter, and everybody holds out hope that they can become smarter. Maybe it's about like the stuff that they want to buy, or how to become a more informed voter, or how to fix something around their house. We all hold out hope that we can gain that knowledge. And I think we can tap into that hope through our choices in content and design. And I think as a designer, as a UX practitioner, as a content strategist, as a content designer, you already have the tools to do that. So I want to talk about how we can use those tools in a new framework that focuses on a powerful combination of voice and volume and vulnerability, kind of those three areas, to empower our audiences and regain their trust. Because if you lose your users' trust, you've lost your users. And that's not a new problem. So I want to take us back a bit. I want to take us back, as I said, beyond the pandemic, beyond the past few years. I want to take us back a few centuries to that old map that Katie showed us initially. So if you'll let me, I want to take us back to commerce in pre-Renaissance Europe. So kind of to the Wayback Machine here. So when we talk about that era, we're talking about some problems that are actually really familiar, because the stuff that we struggle with now around trust and credibility and communication, people in the 1500s struggled with that too. And then the need for information, for trustworthy information, was changing really rapidly. Previously, people who sold goods, maybe it was candles or cloth or salt, they would haul their wares town to town in a region and like kind of take them to like markets and fairs and whatnot. But in the Renaissance, trading families and empires began to grow as they realized that they could actually reap greater rewards and profits by not moving all around, but by staying put and then engaging in arbitrage among multiple cities and countries. The catch for that is that trade merchants needed information, good, reliable, credible information that they could trust about those cities in which they wanted to operate. So that brings us to a gentleman, and Katie, if you'll share on slide 3 now, this person. So his name is George Gies. and he was a Renaissance era trading merchant. And I bring him up because he's very relevant for our work as well. You'll see like little scraps of paper on the wall there behind him. And I know you might be thinking like, oh, clearly he's an information architect. Those are Post-it notes. We know how that plays out. He wasn't an IA. He was this Renaissance era trading merchant. And he represents this emerging middle class, this emerging merchant class, I should say, who ran export and import businesses across all of Europe. And that kind of work took specialized knowledge about the cities in which he operated. So to make good decisions, George Gies relied on people who lived in foreign cities to write him periodic updates about the economic conditions there, maybe about competitors or the palace intrigue, if there was gossip about possible wars. And those letter writers, those correspondents, those foreign correspondents, as you can imagine, they were the first journalists. And a journalist would empower merchants with offering consistent details, a voice that felt comfortable and familiar that they would grow to learn over time, offering a unique perspective, consistent level of detail, as well as their own openness to learning and listening. Those journalists, those foreign correspondents, they wouldn't always get it right, but then they would send a follow-up letter saying, oh, I've continued to learn about these other factors, or this person that I thought might be an ally, I've learned more there as well. So I'm growing in my knowledge and I'm sharing it with you, my trade partner here. So they didn't overpromise to know everything, but instead they offered this sort of vulnerability to learning and listening and always growing. They kept themselves open to new information. And they offered authority and consistency. And that's something that we still value because it empowers us too to make better choices about what we buy and where we eat and how we vote. And Katie, you can stop sharing the slides now. So the point there is that those foreign correspondents established authority by sharing a unique perspective with the right depth of context and level of detail, the right volume of information so as to not be overwhelming, but to be actionable and to empower good decisions. And then by sharing how their knowledge was constantly growing, how they were holding themselves vulnerable and accountable to growth. So you can think of that again as a unique voice, the right volume of detail, and strength through vulnerability. And what they offered was this sense of, I'm here, you're not, so let me tell you about it. And that is something that we rely on today because authority comes from being willing to go where your audience cannot, either because of the danger or of the cost or the depth of expertise. And I think this applies just as much if we're thinking about like when Anderson Cooper talks to us from a war zone, we tune in and pay attention and listen. Or when David Chang, the owner and chef of the Momofuku chain and now the star of Ugly Delicious, when he takes us to explore like Asian Cajun fusion, that sort of thing, we pay attention and listen and we trust his expertise. When Ophebia Quistarkton of NPR comes to us live from Dakar, or when she sat down with Anthony Bourdain to talk about Senegalese food, we listen to both of them because we trust their respective authority, the unique viewpoints they offer, the depth of knowledge to empower us with information, and then we also trust their vulnerability too, that they're saying that they're willing to learn, engage in new experiences on our behalf, and maybe correct their own misconceptions along the way, and bring their audiences, bring us along on that journey as well. And I'm listing out some kind of big examples, but I think it's no different from if you're a copywriter or a content strategist or a designer that's working down the hall from an engineering team that's developing new features. You're engaging, learning about that. You're going somewhere that your audience cannot to be able to then tell them about it, to say, here's what's coming down the pike. Here's what you need to know. Let me tell you about the benefits of these new features. You're saying, I'm here, you're not, let me tell you about it. And that's privileged information. And it's incredibly empowering for your audience as well. And when they can trust you to share that information, That really gives them a leg up. Now, I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of empowerment because for all of those people, Anderson Cooper, Ophavia Quist-Arcton, David Chang, their authority empowers us. And we reward that then in the form of trust. And I've been reading a lot from Jay Rosen, the press critic, on authority. And I think we can bring some of his thinking into our own work. And he writes that authority is simply the right to be listened to. It's a legitimate claim on public attention. And you begin to have authority when you offer a report that users cannot get on their own. So when others can't get this information on their own, but you're able to say, I'm here, you're not, let me tell you about it, that is the moment that you gain authority. And when you do that well, consistently, with the right level of detail, and with a degree of vulnerability over time, that's how you establish trust. And that's what we definitely don't want to squander. And I think we can learn from that because when a brand starts to break from what we know, maybe in their voice or in how they style images and how they present themselves online, when they break from what we know and think about their expertise and their subject matter, it can be hard to reconcile that. And similarly, if you don't provide your audience with the content that meets their needs in terms of length and level of detail, or the level of detail maybe in a diagram to support what they're trying to do, IKEA, you can become irrelevant or the subject of mockery. And those are issues that stoke our cynicism. So inconsistency and irrelevance erode authority and stoke cynicism. And those sort of issues add up. And today, across all industries, people suffer a crisis of trust. Maybe that started in the political sphere or in media, but we have problems today with believing any sort of outside perspectives or marketing. And you see that not just as somebody that might create that stuff as a designer or developer or UX person, but also as a consumer and a citizen in our private lives as readers and shoppers and all, because we used to place trust in familiar brands and maybe in established media. Maybe it was kind of like the news sources that you grew up with, and they reflected our reality. But we don't trust those same institutions anymore because they've been inconsistent with what they promise and the voice and the visual language in which they promise it, what they claim and how they speak to us. And those sort of creeping inconsistencies can be a sneaky thing. Because like us, now our users look at the world with more skepticism than trust. And it's not that I'm trying to make a case here for blind faith, but rather being able to gather information, trust the evidence of our own eyes, and do our own research and have confidence in that research. We can blame inconsistency in the media or in politics. And it used to be that, if you caught a politician flip-flopping, that it could scuttle their campaign. But now we kind of laugh about it. And Katie, if you would, could you just share slide 11? I'm very excited always about the opportunity to share this. So what you're about to see are really a breathtaking example of what happens now for politicians that are caught flip-flopping. These are presidential flip-flops, and designer Sam Morrison created them. And at $30 a pop, they went like hotcakes. And if you'll just go through the next couple slides, you'll see there were variations on them. It's like we live in this golden age of shower shoes now. And that's all I wanted you to see from that. The thing about that, we all can appreciate humorous shoes. Some of us spend our lives trying to find humorous shoes. But when the institutions that we once trusted tell us not to trust the evidence of our own eyes, that's gaslighting. And it affects our very ability to trust both other brands, things that the government is telling us, maybe about services from which we can even benefit. But it also causes problems with how we form trust, how we have confidence in our own knowledge. It undermines our ability to trust ourselves, our own perceptions, and our gut instincts. And that's a problem. Currently in the US, some 63% of the population says it's difficult to differentiate between real and fake news. Maybe we blame the news sources for that, but those are issues that we carry over then into all other types of media. And that's a problem. That's our problem, I think, as people that work to support different organizations, maybe work in ways that support marketing of brands, of consumer brands, retail goods, and government services. And that kind of insidious cynicism undermines all institutions, journalism, government services, public health, every sector of our economy. And if you're in UX or design or marketing or communications, you probably realize that that creeping cynicism is a problem that undermines your work too. But I also think that in our industry, we are well positioned to address it. So this is our problem, but also our opportunity. And I think that's kind of the secret. That's the problem statement, I think, for the future of our work. And I'd go beyond that to say that if right now, as you look around and you feel like within our economy, within our society, it feels like the world is on fire, literally and figuratively, and how much does what we do, maybe developing new calls to action, button nomenclature, taxonomy, look and feel, style guidelines, how much does that matter? If you're ever in that position of saying, how do I possibly focus on that? I think it's because what we do, because it has been affected by these problems and cynicism, it can also be a force for good at correcting it. We can be the people to say, let's start working with our audience, working on behalf of our audience to help them regain some courage and confidence in their ability to do research, to make smart decisions and feel good about the decisions that they make. Because once they can find a foothold for confidence and trust in themselves and in other organizations, that's something they can bring into all other decisions, all other areas of their lives, to approach it not from a sense of indecision and gaslighting and cynicism, but rather of courage and confidence and empowerment. So I think that is what we need to do now. Let's do the things that we can do. And they start with content and design. So to regain our trust, to regain the trust of our audiences, we must empower our audiences. And I think we already have the tools to do that. And whether your users are consumers or citizens or donors or voters, to regain their trust, empower them. And by educating them and rebuilding their confidence in themselves, that's how you can start to regain their trust in the organizations that you support as well. In a minute, we're going to talk about how. But first, I just want to take us back to that idea of authority, because marketing is a form of authority. As we said, it's saying, I'm here, you're not, let me tell you about it. And brands that can teach us about their product category, about being better at our own jobs, whether that is running a store or maybe engaging with government or engaging with public utilities, all of that comes from a position of authority. And if users are slipping away and maybe greeting the content that you present with more skepticism than interest or even loyalty, that's how you know your authority is eroding. That's how you know that trust is eroding. But once we understand that, now we can address it. And I think that's where we can start to approach this problem with a sense of hope. So let's look inward, because if people are looking inward for answers, let's meet them there. So we said to regain your audience's trust, we need to empower them with useful, usable information. As I said, it has really three components: voice, volume, and vulnerability. And those are those same tools that the Renaissance era letter writers used so well. And if they could do it, we can too, because we have Zoom and Google Meetups and Hangouts and whatnot. So, by voice, I mean the distinct personality that manifests both visually and verbally in everything a brand does. So, does your brand project a sense of tradition or maybe more of innovation? Maybe are you more about being witty and polished or more scrappy and creative and entrepreneurial? So your brand's voice is basically what helps your audience distinguish it from competitors, but it's also what helps humanize your brand, kind of to give your audience more footholds and hooks to understand what's going on. It tells your audience who you are, how you are, and if you're someone that they can relate to, somebody that they can grow to trust. And when a brand changes over time, maybe to pursue new offerings or pursue new channels, sometimes there's the risk that it changes its voice too. Maybe you want to roll out some kind of new look and feel or a new interface with completely different typography. Well, those are changes that run the risk of alienating an audience. But by using a consistent voice to expose changes, help your audience know where you're going, that's how your users can maintain confidence, not just in your brand, but also in their own sense of understanding your brand, in their own knowledge of where you're going. Um, Katie, if you could share slide 21. So what you're about to see here, this is from MailChimp, the email marketing platform. They've helped evolve their voice over time by attending to things within their style guidelines and governance. They started out, as you probably know, as a small business serving other small businesses. And early on, Freddie, their mascot, the little MailChimp monkey there, he would serve up copy and he would appear through the platform and you'd hear kind of his voice speaking some of the error messages and all. But over time, they've matured. They're no longer a small business. Now they handle more than 60% of the world's email marketing. They've added lots of services and all, like e-commerce, but they never wanted to alienate their existing customers. So they've maintained certain aspects of their brand. The copy remains first person, but now the tone is more robust, and they vary it depending on the expertise of the audience with which they're speaking. Branding still uses this same familiar yellow, but the illustration style has matured and become more nuanced. And Katie, if you want to just click ahead to the next slide there, and you can see kind of how they vary things. People trust MailChimp in part because their voice is familiar and consistent, not monolithic, but they've allowed it to mature. They've allowed for variation within it too, depending on if they're talking to a beginner audience or an expert audience, as you'll see on the following slide there. And you can think about how your style guidelines could support that kind of diversity and growth and brand extension because your audience probably needs it and content creators can benefit from it too. So, your brand's voice addresses how they communicate. I want to move on now to the next slide to just talk a bit about volume, by which I mean how much you're communicating, how much you say, both in length and level of detail, again, visually and verbally. So, how do you know how much to say on a given topic? Should you be prescribing really long blog posts and product descriptions in terms of character counts? Or is it more about like the breadth of topic? Should you have image galleries with 100 different images in them to describe a product? Or are one or two big, less detailed images with a lot of areas of flat color? Is that more appropriate? And we know that brevity and bullets online have ceded space to long form content, even on e-commerce sites. But we also know that that trend isn't a license to just babble. So how do you determine how much content is enough? I think that comes down to what we can discover through user research. You know you've offered enough detail when your audience can make good decisions and then report that they feel good about the decisions that they make. So let's take a look at this from the perspective of volume. And if you'll just go on to the next slide there. Um, America's Test Kitchen earns attention and love and loyalty because they empower their audiences, which vary a lot, but they empower their audiences by effectively meeting them where they are. on the platform that they're using and at their level of expertise that they're offering, with the right level of detail and the right amount of content for their mindset and channel and device. So that means for novice chefs, they're able to offer them additional reading or advanced techniques. And then looking across their TV show, their cooking school shows, the way they rework recipes in Cooks Illustrated and Cooks Country, different cookbooks, Twitter feed, Instagram feed, wherever they're producing content, they're always optimizing it correctly for the specific reading and use case. So in this case, interaction design and the choices that go into it support helping their users not just have lots of information, but enough information to feel competent and like they can get the outcomes they want in the kitchen. So that means if you're looking at a recipe on a phone, you can find swipeable recipes like in your Instagram feed where the individual photos are made to be actionable and the steps to support them are streamlined and right there in the captions. Whereas if you're looking at a recipe in the magazine, you'll find paragraph after paragraph of the different variables that go into it and the wisdom behind different techniques. You'll find different articles supporting the content, maybe around the geopolitical implications of sourcing particular peppers from war-torn regions. All of that is available if you're looking at it in a context where you might want to read more. They're not just going for brevity, they're going for enough so that people are set up for success. So they're investing in an appropriate level of detail to really help you engage, be successful, and also to help you engage your senses. This isn't about being fast, but about getting it right. So they're really selling empowerment, not the ego of one particular chef or the stories behind a team's experiences, but they're writing it so that it works well for the people that are consuming that content, and then ideally will be consuming the food as well. I sat down with their chief creative officer, Jack Bishop, a while ago, and he said, we teach people when they're cooking to use all their senses. So to kind of tap into the content around them that's outside of print as well, but to pay attention to maybe what something smells like. If you're trying to see if a loaf of bread is done, to tap the bottom and listen for the sound. We teach people to use all their senses, not just follow a recipe, because success breeds confidence. They want to help people get it right, not just do it. And I think that's a way in which their brand differs from many other recipes, recipe producers, recipe websites, and publishers. In some cases, they want to publish something that looks beautiful on the page, but maybe is kind of irrelevant in your own kitchen. In some cases, they want to publish a recipe where maybe they're giving you the backstory of how this recipe has been handed down to that particular blogger from all these other family members. When America's Test Kitchen publishes a recipe, they're not doing it for them. They're doing it for you, their user. They want to make sure that you can feel successful so that you feel confident. And that idea that success breeds confidence, that's what earns them trust again and again and again. And this idea that when we help our users do well, maybe feel proud or smart or accomplished, they become confident. That means they're becoming more confident in both themselves and in us, in whatever the organization or brand or publisher it is that helped them make a good decision. Maybe it's about getting a vaccine. Maybe it's about how to pay their taxes and to know that they're doing things correctly and feel confident about it. Maybe it's about buying a jacket and feeling like, yeah, they know which product is right for them and will meet their needs this winter. To share another example that's kind of in that same vein of more content, more detail allows people to feel more confident. If you'll go to slide 28, I want to share Crutchfield Electronics. So they're also known for publishing a lot of detail. The image on the left there is what one particular page on their site looks like that's helping you evaluate different camera lenses. If you zoom all the way out on that page, you can see there's a lot there. There's a lot of images comparing different lenses, showing you what different photos look like through them. And if you go to Crutchfield's website, it's because you're in the market. Maybe it is to buy a new camera lens or a new piece of home audio equipment or a new stereo system for your car. You're going there maybe to buy the product, but also to get information about the product, to make sure that what you buy is right, that it's going to be something that you can install in your vehicle and that you're not going to regret the decision. And I spoke with their brand manager, Julie Govan, and she said that we want to make sure that people that come here have enough confidence to feel good about decisions that they make, and then feel good about it from the moment they click add to cart until it arrives at their homes. Because people who aren't confident in what they're getting either won't buy or won't be happy with what they get. And as a result, with the investments that they've made in content, with long form content like this, with videos showing what different products and components look like inside and all, with their investments in content, they see a lot of their traffic come back again and again and again to research and really feel comfortable with decisions before they make them. And that works really well, especially if you're selling something that's a little bit more big ticket or maybe a little bit more mission critical. For them, they've been able to realize that education drives empowerment, empowerment drives confidence, and confidence drives trust. Another way to summarize that is customer loyalty. So I want to flip to a kind of contrasting example here. So slide 30, that idea of confidence, that's something that gov.uk has really had to wrestle with. So in Britain, the citizens could get government service information previously from 9 different websites, plus The Guardian. And in fact, most of the time people were trying to find information about taxes or government benefits or maybe how to apply for different services. They were frequently turning to the newspapers to get that information rather than any government website. Because I'm sure you can imagine maintaining 9 different sources of government information made for a maintenance nightmare. And we know, and if there's one thing that's true about content strategy, is that we prize consistency and sustainability above almost everything else. So the government's answer to this problem of volume wasn't to create more canonical information, but rather to say, let's make less. Let's refine what we have, edit it down, and adopt a mantra that government should only produce content on the things on which only government can produce content. So that meant rather than having information about, and this is a true example, about beekeeping and the kind of bees to produce different honey, they said, why don't we let different regional beekeepers associations have the websites on that? We should just be publishing information on how to pay different sort of taxes on bringing bees into the country and what sort of licenses you need. And that's the thing, not all topics need more information to earn trust. Sometimes they just need content pared down to its essentials and to signal that what you are reading here is current, relevant, and complete. That's the stuff that can inspire confidence as well. So by paring down to the essentials, their government design services team whittled 75,000 pages of content down to 3,000. Far easier to maintain and to support. And then when they checked it with their users, both after and along the way, the kind of feedback that they were getting in focus groups and in research sessions was to hear people say, oh, that's it? That's done? Oh, that seems almost too easy. That's all I need to do. People were surprised at the confidence that they felt in government information. And maybe surprise isn't something that we want to create, but certainly if we can start people on the path toward confidence, then we can start them on the path toward trust. And of course, this means that content design and information design are as much content strategy as is building out an editorial calendar to support long-form publishing. And none of this is fast, but it's about helping and empowering our users. And eventually that becomes much easier and faster for us to support as well. All right, now I want to talk a bit about vulnerability, the third part of the framework. So, if a consistent voice and the appropriate volume of information are characteristics of good brand-driven content strategy and user-centered design, I think we kind of know that a consistent voice offering enough information, that's kind of the baseline in our industry. It doesn't mean that it's always easy to hit, but we at least need to start there. If you'll move on to slide 33 there, Penzias spices. This can start what we understand about vulnerability, because it's through vulnerability that efforts in voice and volume unite to foster trust. But this is also where you can encounter more risk for your organization. It means you're going to risk criticism and maybe ridicule or rabid customers. Every time you reveal hard truths about your organization or take the time to prototype in public. Not everybody supports that. But as it turns out, with that great risk also comes great reward. Customers that witness this kind of public evolution, that take part in supporting the effort to prototype in public, or that come to understand you every time you openly share your values, those tend to be the most loyal customers. And you make your brand vulnerable by engaging in transparency, but I think you also make your brand stronger. And there are plenty of examples to illustrate that. So Penzias is one of them. Penzias spices, if you're not familiar with it, they're a spice merchant, a spice retailer based in the Midwest, based outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They've grown stronger over time by owning who they are, sharing who they are, what they stand for, and really by embracing vulnerability. And I think by operationalizing vulnerability, you expose your brand to criticism, input, and risk, but can gain a more engaged community and more loyal brand champions. So for Penzias, they decided to put a stake in the ground a few years ago by declaring what they stood for beyond just spices. They said, here we also stand for supporting immigration, welcoming people in an inclusive way, no matter who they are. And in 2016, in the wake of the US election, Bill Penzi, the owner of Penzias Spices, he took to Facebook to make it clear that the company's positions on immigration and racism and other issues were not in line with the winner of the election. He felt that a presidential candidate who would stoke hatred for immigrants really ran counter to the company's purpose, which is to bring people together around cooking, and cooking as an act of love. And I know you might be thinking, like, spice company, stay in your lane. Even if you're a bigger company that has stores all across the US, what are you doing? Well, to preempt people who might have said, hey, what are you doing? Stay in your lane. He shared that cooking is political. Our family favorites represent the stories of human migration, and they're oftentimes flavored with spices that are sourced from all over the world. He felt like these issues of society were the important issues for his company as well. And on the next slide there, you'll see a bit of a screen grab of what he posted. So he took this position, wrote this long screed on Facebook of saying, this is what we stand for, this is what we don't stand for. Let us know how you think. And it garnered a lot of attention, some positive, some negative. The company lost some customers, but then they saw their sales spike in record levels. And that happened again and again every time they took this kind of openly political stance in his Facebook posts. Over the past few years, they've actually enjoyed a 50% increase in online sales. And as more and more people would share their posts, those people would be seeing themselves as part of a movement and go on to then support the company. Even if they are, like me, not somebody that really cooks a lot, they would say, I have friends and family members that do, and this is where I'm getting their Christmas presents this year. So in contrast, we can kind of measure the impact of this by looking at Penzias' closest competitor, the Spice House, also in Milwaukee. They took kind of a different stance. When Penzias was doing this, they said, well, we think we are above this. We're going to offer our customers a discount code all caps, no politics. We don't think businesses should be getting into politics or sharing our personal politics. And the thing is, staying out of politics is a stance that reflects privilege that isn't shared by people that are affected by discriminatory policy. If you're Black, you can't stay out of politics. If you're a woman, you probably can't stay out of politics anymore because they're not staying out of you. So that idea of staying out of politics, staying above the fray, staying detached from the society that is all around your organization, that's a political statement in itself, and it's becoming increasingly risky for many organizations. We saw kind of in the wake of some of the early Black Lives Matter protests over the summer that organizations that either didn't take a stance or those that attempted to just pay it lip service but not do anything beyond that, their audiences and increasingly their employees picked them apart for that. It turned out to be pretty risky for them to try to stay out of politics. But we can see here that vulnerability, like voice, is an act of telling people who you are so that then they can make more informed, more empowered decisions about if they want to do business with you or not. And over time, we've seen that this matters more and more to consumers across every industry. I think in the last Edelman Trust survey, it was something like 73% of consumers said that they cared and wanted to know about the brands that they choose to let into their lives, what their stances were on different political issues. Now, if we want to move on to slide 36, Penzies used content to help its community self-identify. Sometimes, though, your brand might be vulnerable by engaging with your community. And as I said, kind of prototyping in public by showing them how you're planning to evolve and to get feedback along the way. That's something that BuzzFeed does quite frequently. They like to kind of do it live and roll out a beta to get feedback, to solicit opinions, and get input from their entire audience. That level of vulnerability demonstrates trust in their audience and a degree of respect for their audience. And then as their audience contributes to a better product by saying things like, oh, I like this new approach, or that diagram doesn't quite do it for me, they also increase their trust in the brand. They're a part of its success. It takes vulnerability, though, to say, we're figuring this out. We don't have all the answers quite yet, so let's discuss. If you go on to the next slide there, another example from BuzzFeed. So when they're saying that the information that they offer is good, they're also saying it may not be comprehensive, but we respect you, our audience. We respect you enough that we want you to be smart about whatever this particular topic is. We want to bring in some opposing viewpoints. Bring it in so that we'll host the conversation, but you can know what other people are saying as well. So oftentimes at the end of their articles, they'll have a little feature called Outside Your Bubble, where they bring in hand-curated outside perspectives, maybe from Reddit or Twitter, so that people can see what other people are saying about the topic as well. Their brand is strong enough to respect their audience and to kind of tell them what's going on beyond just their website, rather than limit their worldview. They respect them enough to not deny them information. Now, it's risky for a brand to put a stake in the ground like that, but it takes even more vulnerability to acknowledge deficiencies and ask for help. And maybe your company has screwed up. And Katie, if you want to just take it off the slides now, I want to look everybody in the eye around this. So if your brand has maybe screwed up, maybe the CEO has done something horrible, maybe employees and critics and customers are demanding an explanation, maybe it's just a problem with a product, but they want accountability. That can be really tough to wrangle with. And your organization is really at its most vulnerable when you're staggering away from mistakes. Maybe you're wounded by errors in judgment or reeling from some sort of jaw-dropping mistake. And whether blame is broad or more focused like a spear, what comes next is what matters most. Do you double down on defeat, try to deny things and hope everybody forgets it? Or do you embrace the opportunity? I don't know if anybody bought into this, but a few years ago, an organization on Kickstarter called Antsy Labs rolled out what was actually the first fidget cube. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but they're like little devices that it's molded out of plastic, and on one side there's a little switch that you can play with, and there's buttons on the other side. There's some stuff that's clicky, some stuff that's slidey, um, all sorts of little manipulative stuff in this little cube. And they rolled them out as something for people that were antsy, a desk toy for kids with ADHD to help them focus and all. And they rolled them out through this Kickstarter campaign. And it was a Kickstarter campaign that went off the rails. There were 400 times more people that backed it than they had ever anticipated, which is kind of the good problem to have. Until it comes time to keep up with that demand and keep up with manufacturing if you're an organization that's new to manufacturing. And the challenges that they saw around that product increased exponentially. The manufacturing problems cascaded into shipping problems. And then finally, the product that they described as a Christmas stocking stuffer didn't actually finish shipping until the following April. So kind of not such a good problem to have. But what they did, what they responded to, and how they communicated throughout that process, that's something that we can all kind of look at and from which I think we can learn. It's a good lesson in vulnerability. Because to begin with, they frequently updated their audience. And Kickstarter campaigns are known for offering updates as to what's going on and all. Over the course of this campaign, there were more than 30 updates from the founders. They would explain what was happening with the manufacturing and shipping, talk about the reason for the delays, what was going on in the warehouse. And then they would also offer some show of accountability. They would take responsibility in the first person, saying, here's what happened, here's what we didn't know, here's what we discovered, here's what we're going to do to try to address it. So they realized when, like, for example, they started fielding more than 2,000 emails a day from customers and prospective customers asking, what is going on? They realized that they weren't being as responsive as they wanted to be. So they acknowledged it and then said, so we're adding a few more people to our customer service team. And then when they eventually started shipping out the product, they saw that the customer feedback was still frequent, but it became much more positive. They were able to address their errors as they were happening, keep everybody apprised of what was going on, communicate with them openly and transparently and frequently, and with a degree of accountability to say, here's what happened, here's what we're going to do about it. They've since launched other campaigns that are responded. They're getting a fairly good response, and they're applying those lessons in being vulnerable, in offering good communication in the first person and with the right level of detail and with the right degree of transparency. All those things add up to respect the audience. And I think that that's something that we've seen. That was a few years ago. We've seen that a lot just over the past 6-7 months as well. Let's talk about Zoom, because I think we've seen Zoom over the past several months offer a masterclass in vulnerability. So in 2019, they rolled out a robust phone version. They also started offering a range of new features like advanced virtual backgrounds if you wanted to hide what was behind you, as well as virtual waiting rooms if you wanted to kind of keep the public at bay until you were ready to let them in. And those features would prove valuable in ways that they could have never anticipated this year. Other things that they couldn't anticipate. Well, as business responded to COVID-19 by mandating that people work from home and schools started moving toward remote learning, usage of Zoom exploded. And 90,000 schools across 20 countries jumped on the platform this past spring. Zoom never anticipated that. They also didn't ever expect that families would be connecting for birthday celebrations and holiday meals and virtual visits and happy hours and whatnot, all on their platform. And if you think about it, all those people that were doing that, the 90,000 schools, and I don't even know how many teachers, and all those family members now using Zoom, they were doing it without the aid of tech support, without people telling them best practices and security practices that they should be implementing. In December of last year, so before the virus reached pandemic proportions, Zoom would count on average no more than like 10 million daily users, daily meeting participants. By March 2020, the platform saw the usage explode to 200 million daily participants. And again, very few of them were actually from business. Very few of them actually had tech support behind them. All those people were expecting the platform to perform in ways in which it hadn't been designed to support. And they were having problems with it. They were complaining about it. They were complaining about Zoom bombers joining their meetings and family sessions and birthday parties and happy hours as well. And the CEO responded to that in April. He didn't call out those issues. He didn't say, hey, you're doing it wrong, which essentially he was within all rights to do. He didn't stoke their anger. He didn't even call out the Zoom bombers. He issued a wonderful kind of statement in the form of a blog post that is a model of trust and vulnerability. First, he apologized. He said, we recognize that we have fallen short of the community's expectations and our own for privacy and security. For that, I am deeply sorry. He said, we did this. I am sorry. I am taking responsibility and blame for this, and I want to share what we are going to do about it. I am telling you this. So he's apologizing in the first person, explaining what happened, and then he went into a lot of detail that really showed a sign of respect for his audience to say, here's what we're going to do on this sort of timeline, and also here's how you can hold me accountable. So he explained and said, we have had a much broader set of users than we ever anticipated. They presented us, you have presented us with challenges that we didn't anticipate when we first conceived the platform. And we're learning from that. Thank you. So he's really turning the problem into an opportunity to learn. And that's not spin, that's smart. He also went on to say in that same post that dedicated journalists and security researchers and whatnot have been helping us identify the flaws in here. We appreciate this level of scrutiny. And this is what's going to make Zoom better, both as a company and for all of our users. And then he went on to say, here's my plan to hold me accountable. He offered to conduct weekly webinars, to say that he was going to be publishing a transparency report, and also that the company would be submitting to third-party audits. His response was swift, it was specific, and it was transparent. And all of that adds up to make it really a powerful case study in accepting responsibility, being accountable for growth, and earning trust through that level of vulnerability. That idea that voice, consistent voice, that is accessible to your audience and the right volume of detail and demonstrating growth through vulnerability, that idea is that adds up to earn trust through a framework and through tools, maybe governance guidelines and standards that we already know, on which we can already focus. And I think that's what our audiences need now. That's what our society needs. And I think for the different brands that we support, the organizations in which you work, they can be leaders in moving us forward, because it's easy to be cynical. It's so easy, and we have so many reasons to be cynical. But cynics look at the world as it is and say it can be worse. I think designers and writers and builders of brands and brainstorms, we look at the world as it is and say it can be better. And if you are hopeful that it can be, let's work so that it will be. Because despite all of our reasons to be cynical, and as I said, there are so many, and I don't fault us for having them. We have deceitful politicians, deceptive business practices, but people still act with hope. And we all think that we can become smarter, better, and kinder. People still buy lottery tickets. And I think our organizations and our work itself can affirm that hope by helping our audiences, helping our users become more confident, to feel more courage in their convictions, feel like they have a greater sense of control and a greater sense of empowerment about feeling smarter, getting better, and engaging with the world in a more knowledgeable way. We can design our way out of cynicism and toward trust. And I think that you can do it for yourself, for your organization, for your users, and for our society. And I think that's where I want to leave us. Let's go. Let's do the things that we can do, because if you are fired up and if you are as bullish about this as I am, this is our path forward. This is what we can do. This is what will move us forward. This is what will move our society forward. So let's go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margot. That was fantastic. I want to open it up to anyone, if anyone has any questions. I didn't see anything in the chat, but I do want to drop a link for Margot's book as well. We mentioned at the beginning, it's called Trustworthy. It's coming out in March, and you can read much more about what some of the examples that Margot shared, and some great tools. Anything else you want to say about the book also?
Sure. Well, I would say go to that link, appropriateinc.com/trustworthy. Drop your email there. It's to sign up for a newsletter, but I will say I don't really have a newsletter. But this is where I'll be sending out information about the pre-order, ways that you can share it with your company, as well as advanced excerpts from the book, some more color commentary on some of the interviews that I conducted and all, and the case studies in it, as well as analysis about what's going on with the organizations around us now that are maybe acting as models of trust and beacons of credibility, and what we can learn from them. So go there, do that, and I can also share with you. This is the advanced reading copy, so it's just paperback, but this is what it looks like. The real one's going to be hardcover, and I have to say, I worked with the designer was Peter Cocking, and the illustrator Rich Woodall, who you might be familiar with him from. He's a comic book artist for Marvel and DC. He's done work for the Star Wars franchise, Kira Jungle Girl. And their collaboration was just amazing, to take this idea of trust and moving your audience from where they are to where you need them to be. And they just they ran with that metaphor of what trust can look like in such a visceral way. And yeah, so I'm stoked to use my platform to spotlight them, as well as the organizations that I feel like are doing it well in the book.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing a little sneak peek of that. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and just hop in. Don't be shy. I mean, I think, unfortunately, one of the awkward things about the virtual world is we can't see you if you're waving. So just start talking.
I can. Oh, were you about to?
Go for it.
Oh. I'm new to the group. I'm Meredith Castile. And one of the things that I was thinking about when you were starting, Margot, was about the edge case of kind of hyper gullibility. So it's an edge case, but it's millions of people following QAnon kind of thing. And, Google's Jigsaw project aims to kind of redirect extremists into, as you've been thinking about trust for a while now, what do you make of how to kind of bring those folks into the fold? Because I think you're right. Most of us are kind of jaded at this point, but not everybody.
Right. Yeah, I think jaded is probably a kinder way to say it too. That's a really good question, because I think you're right. It's kind of beyond faith, beyond maybe kind of empty or unfounded faith. There's kind of that other issue of gullibility. And I think that's what we see as kind of the next step. That's what comes after gaslighting. When people have been told not to trust their own lived experiences, or the evidence of their own eyes of how the world works. And And then they're easily swayed by information in a meme or something that looks great, even if it sounds a little hollow. That's when they become more susceptible to disinformation. And I think organizations that are so adept at creating and publishing that information know that really well. I think that the way to counter that, from what I've seen in news media and journalism, as well as kind of in more anecdotal experiences and what people talk about with, I don't want to say rescuing friends and family, but kind of helping them step back and step away from that sort of thinking, is to work at bolstering their confidence in what they know from their own experiences about the world. Maybe through what they know from work or from experience in certain industries, to help people retreat to a point of safe confidence, well-earned confidence and wisdom. I think that's where people can start to build back up and to say, all right, based on my 40 years of lived experience, or my experience maybe working in a particular industry, I know these things that they're telling me are not scientifically possible. And I think when we can have those conversations that build on that build on kind of shared knowledge of the world that is based in science and fact and can be empirically proven, when we can tap into those things, then we can use them as a foundation to help people start to kind of build back up in a way that better aligns with reality. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I feel hope for the first time in 2020.
That's wonderful. That's really good to hear. It's funny, somebody asked me recently when I was discussing this, like, so after all this, after doing this research, because I've been researching the topics that are in Trustworthy for, I guess, since late 2016. Do you still have hope? Do you have hope? Are you a hopeful person? And I thought about it, and yeah, I am, for a few reasons. I mean, for one, I'm an optimist, and I know I'm an optimist for some very maybe silly reasons. But the thing I always go back to is I started wearing glasses when I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. And then my parents let me get contact lenses when I was 16. So I've been wearing contacts for the better part of 20 years now. And there are still times, like, usually I'm good about it. Like, I'll always take my contacts out at night, except for the handful of times that I forget to. And then I like wake up and after I've fallen asleep with my contacts in, I wake up, and every time this happens, for usually a good few seconds afterward, when I wake up and open up my eyes, my first thought is not, oh, I fell asleep with my contacts in. It's, oh my God, my vision has miraculously corrected itself. I can see clearly. Even though I've worn glasses for almost my entire life, I still always think this. And that is my personal proof that I'm an optimist. But I think more seriously, looking at just the issue of hope, the reason that I have hope is because so many people hope to be better. I think for most of us, except for the really kind of entrenched naysayers that probably just want to be better at naysaying, most of us want to get smarter. We want to and we think we can get smarter, to do our jobs better, to become better members, maybe more active members of our communities, to become better members of our families and all. And I think that belief of being able to get better, hoping that we can and thinking that we can, that is what gives me hope.
Margot, I definitely agree with you. I think, like, certainly at least most of the people on this call are like also optimistic and hopeful that we can actually like impart some change. One question I do have for you though is, and I think your book might actually get into this, but okay, like looking at Shopify, for example, where we say we're merchant obsessed, and so our design is very informed by merchant insights and the people that are using the product and what they actually want. And as you said, like, our goal is to empower them so that they build trust in Shopify. What would you say for the folks that are maybe not at a company that is as user obsessed, and like on the marketing side, maybe they're reluctant or nervous about, kind of setting a foot out there to be, bold in their actions like Penzies, or like on the product side, a company that doesn't really want to invest the resources or the money in like user data. Do you have any tips, I guess, for those folks?
Yeah. So, and I applaud what Shopify does by putting it out there of saying that you are so user oriented, that you are user obsessed and customer obsessed. I think is terrific, because then that kind of beacon, that mantra, that North Star can guide all of your other decisions. I think that my not so subtle call in Trustworthy is to say, you can also help your company, your organization, if you're in a civic space, um, to put empowerment of your audience first. And I think the way that you do that is through so many of our other decisions in content, by showing how it makes sense economically. And I think that, like, if you're a copywriter, as a content strategist, or as a designer, if someone from marketing comes to you, or to a project manager and says, "Here's the brief. Here's what we're trying to accomplish," you might be able to easily advocate for standards like consistency, and why we don't want to surprise our users with a whole new taxonomy or calls to action that they haven't seen anywhere else in the site, because that stuff it's tough to learn, and maybe it'll undercut sales. Maybe you'll actually lose customers because of it. All of those kinds of reasons that cost money. Um, I think that we can also oftentimes make the case internally that by adopting standards around consistency and governance, they enable people to contribute within our organizations more easily and get it right the first time. So if your organization doesn't have brand style guidelines, visual and editorial style guidelines, you can advocate for them, not just because maybe they're nice to have, but also by getting your legal team involved in approving them. It means all content, all design that is created with respect to them within their boundaries will be that much faster to approve, that much more cost efficient and effective to approve as well. It also means that your organization will be able to respond, or react to people that much more quickly, like on social media. If people already know the guidelines within which they need to operate, not only will their content be more consistent, but it will already be kind of in line with what legal has approved. And I think the other economic benefit to that in an organization is that when people contributing to a blog, or maybe writing out product copy, or writing out new content for your website, when they're able to get it right the first time, when they already know out of the gate, what an image needs to accomplish, and kind of the design standards and parameters of it, when they're able to get it right the first time, they feel good about that. Everybody likes getting back like the paper with the A at the top, rather than the paper that's like kind of all marked up in red and says "See me" on it. Um, and and I think when we can kind of tap into that and say, if we enable our internal contributors to create things that are more consistent, not only does it serve our users, but also it serves us, because it turns out people that get it right the first time are happier with their jobs. They have a greater sense of alignment with the organization, and that reduces turnover. And that saves money too. So I think we can always make that kind of economic case. I think when we talk about something like vulnerability, there are a few different ways to approach that. I mean, there's going to be people that hear the word vulnerability and think weakness. So we don't need to use that word. But when we can talk about the value and show examples of the value of exposing a product roadmap to our audiences, or sharing things about like maybe how we're learning new technology and we're really excited to roll it out to them, and we're showing behind the scenes process work, maybe through different social media feeds, we can show the value of that in getting people bought in early on, and how that can increase sales and increase customer loyalty. So again, there are economic benefits to this. If at the end of the day, you make your user more confident, have a greater sense of empowerment, help foster their sense of trust, that's terrific. I think the ways that we make the cases for it maybe have to be more pragmatic within our organizations, and that's okay too.
Thank you. Yeah, along those lines, I saw Michael had like a related question. If you want to dig into that, he mentions that he works with his company works with governments, financial and telecom organizations. I struggle to think how those clients are comfortable with failure. How can I make the case that vulnerability is an asset to creating a greater level of trust?
That's a great question. So, Michael, obviously, I don't know like the specifics of your organization, but I think just kind of looking at those industries where they do have to oftentimes respond to failure, I think it's the response, kind of sharing the details of that in which they can embrace vulnerability and demonstrate their strength. So I think that it used to be very common in organizations when maybe utility service went down, or maybe they had a website that wasn't functioning properly for the citizens that were using it, to try to just scramble to take care of it and hide the fact and maybe never talk about it again. That taps into thinking that was really popular in like the 80s, maybe the early 90s too. Kind of like the era where everybody wore shoulder pads to make themselves bigger than they were. I think our businesses wore shoulder pads too, to be a little bit tougher, a little bit bigger, and to not really show who we were or any sort of weakness. And I think we can take off those rhetorical shoulder pads now to say, we're human too. Sometimes we screw up, or sometimes things happen and we have to respond to them, and kind of embrace that first person. And it's in describing the response, maybe sharing that, like, for example, you mentioned like a telecom organization. Maybe it's in sharing that, like, for whatever reason, service to a certain number of customers went down. Maybe they didn't anticipate like the load over a certain time period and they had to deal with it and respond to it. I think share that response. That is what really earns respect. Maybe to say, we brought in our engineering team on the weekend. First, they tried this approach, which has been popular in our industry, has worked for us in the past. We thought it was a surefire way to solve this issue. Didn't work, or it didn't work as well as we wanted to, because we have very high standards. So instead, we tried this other approach. We were really happy that everyone was able to contribute. We started hearing back from our audience that finally their service was up. We were happy with the results, but also here's what we're implementing to make sure we never lose service like that again, to make sure that our customers never have to suffer through that again. I think that failure becomes the opportunity to tell this story of investment, persistence, determination, and growth. And I think that's a huge opportunity.
I'd love to piggyback on that question. So I think what you're describing from my perspective is about like more transparency, sharing more information. It's more informative in some ways. I totally agree that can help to build trust. What I'm curious about from some of your other examples, I was thinking about the Penzies example, that is more about kind of sharing opinion. It's about being more opinionated, more than informational, or informative. And I found myself thinking, okay, so did Chick-fil-A talking about why they're not open on Sundays build my trust? Not really. Did Hobby Lobby talking about why they're not going to do like birth control for their employees build my trust? Not particularly. So like, I'm curious, as you're thinking about opinionated and trustworthy, where you see the relationship and what might differentiate something that builds trust, or is it just about building trust for a certain audience? Like, there's something there that I'm just sort of grappling with.
So I love that you brought up those examples, because like Chick-fil-A is the one that I oftentimes turn to when people ask about this. Do you really want to share all of your politics and personal opinions and stuff as a corporation, if corporations are people now? And I come down on the side of saying, yes, more transparency is better. And personally, I'm glad that Chick-fil-A shared their politics, because it informed me and helped me make a better decision to maybe not be their customer. I want to know how my dollars are supporting other causes. And as I said, it's something like 73% of consumers now say, I'd rather know, even if it means maybe I'm learning about brands that I don't want to support anymore. And certainly there have been organizations that when they share their politics at times, I think, oh, this is going to be a hard one. And sometimes that translates in the form of a boycott. Sleeping Giants has spearheaded a lot of these, and they've been able to see big changes from many brands that say, we shared who we are. Our audience told us they didn't like who we are. Maybe we're going to change now. They've never said, maybe we're going to hide who we are, but it's usually the response of, we're going to change, maybe make different investments now. And I think for those organizations, or for really any organization, transparency builds trust. I'm sure there are people that when they heard more about Chick-fil-A's politics, or they heard more about Hobby Lobby's perspectives on its employees' healthcare needs and their involvement with it, I'm sure there were people that said, you align with my values. I'm going to be your customer now. And then there were other people that said, no, not for me. And I think it's in that transparency that we may create shifts in our audiences, but ultimately we create more loyal audiences, more informed audiences. And it goes back to that idea that information can empower people to make better decisions, and decisions that they feel more confident about. I guess we could also say more intentional decisions too.
If I can take a second. Oh, yeah. So funny thing about Penzies. So I'm kind of a foodie. So when you brought up that example, there's actually one I thought about that was another time that I've had an experience at Penzies that reminded me of that transparency and vulnerability. So back several years ago, they actually had an extensive part of their storefront was due to artisanal salts. So you had smoked salt and seasoning salt mixes and stuff like that. And as it came through, they were talking. This was at the beginning of the kind of salt, fat, sugar kind of trend. They started to evaluate the use of salt in food, and they actually got rid of the whole section of the store that had that. And one of the things I remember, why I remember it so clearly, was I was looking for a particular thing, and I went in the store and saw this little sign and said, "Oh, hey, all of our spice blends are now salt free, and we're not doing any of these like exotic, like expensive salts or kind of gourmet kind of boutique stuff." And they were like, "Well, because we're trying to lower the amount of salt in everyone's diet." And so it was an ability. They were showing vulnerability. They were actually taking probably a pretty big cut, because they had a whole bunch of this product that people went to, and they're not sourcing that anymore. So now, but they went to and said, okay, now we're going to just move away from this chunk of our business because we don't think it's a healthy part of our business. And while you can't go to Penzies for Alderwood smoked salt anymore, I definitely felt a lot better about going to Penzies, because I felt like they had my health as well as good taste in mind. So
that's interesting. I feel like that's such a good, so I'll say two things. First, Martha's Vineyard sea salt, really good flavors. But also, it's interesting because I think that's really embracing the kind of next step in this of saying, thinking beyond kind of the current state of capitalism, what is the role of the corporation in our society? What are the roles of brands in our society? And is it to simply sell you stuff and hope you buy it? Or is it also to say, well, what is our responsibility to our audience to help them make good choices, feel good about the choices they make, but maybe to also engage in a better way in society, funnel their dollars toward different social interests and all, but to be healthier or stronger in different ways. And it's kind of an interesting shift toward the broader responsibility of brands to contribute to society. I don't touch on that a lot in Trustworthy, but I think just the act of empowering people and helping to foster their trust, that's the first thing that I think organizations can do to start to give back. To create a stronger society, we create first stronger audiences, stronger consumers and citizens and users, and that starts with us.
Absolutely. So I realize that we are at the top of the hour. Margot, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and everyone for your questions and participation and just showing up. And yeah, this was so great.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Looking forward to the book coming out.
Thank you. Yeah.